Well, thank you very much for those fulsome compliments. And I'm delighted to be talking to you today. In fact, this is going to be very different from Christian's talk, and very languages and social sciences in feel. I'd like to start this by just saying that I imagine there are a few of you here who are actually leaders or team leaders, managers here at Aston, but the majority of you won't be. And I imagine that in about 10 or 15 years, if I was to invite you all back again to this talk, the majority of you would actually be leaders by then. And the reason I think that is I'm looking at, well, actually I can't see you at all, but I'm looking at a hall full of highly talented and very qualified people who've invested a huge amount of time and resources, and money even, into your education. And after all, Aston is famous for developing business and professional leaders. So I think it's a safe bet to say in 10 years' time, the majority of you will be leaders. But hang on a minute. If you look at the screenshot behind me, it's slightly fuzzy, and it actually is a screenshot from a program called Women at the Top, filmed by BBC Two last year. What you'll see there is you'll see a formation of 70 graduates, all from University College London, in fact. And those on the left are men in the blue T-shirts. Those on the right are women in the red T-shirts. At least they didn't choose Barbie pink. And it isn't rocket science to see that in that formation there are equal numbers of men and women. And that represents a statistical fact in Britain, that equal numbers of men and women graduate from British universities. So far, so good. But in a few years' time, by the time that you are looking at middle management level, which many of you should reach, things have changed a bit. And what we'll see at that stage, if current figures continue as they are, that 70% of middle managers will in fact be men. This is rather strange. And naturally, obviously, 30% will be women. Fine, but then what happens? So even at this very sort of junior level, and it is a junior level, women are not being promoted into positions at the same rate as men. And that gap actually begins to widen. So as we move into or towards senior management level, towards board level and executive level, that gap begins to widen even more. And this is really the level where real power is being wielded, if you like, in the business and professional world. And there we'll find, and this is a generous statistic actually, that by that stage, 83% will be men. And obviously, you can work it out for yourself, 17% will be women. So where on earth have all the women gone? Where have they gone? And isn't it, if you think about your talent and our combined resources, isn't that something of a waste? And what should we be trying to do about it? Now, obviously, I'm just a humble academic, and, you know, it's not just my view. I'm not the only person to notice that. This is viewed as a major political and societal issue. And currently, there's Lord Davis, who's a pillar of the establishment, who, at a very recent meeting, said that this is about social change. It's a huge issue facing corporate UK. We have to reach the government's target of 25% women on top boards by 2015. So, you know, here we are, the establishment are thinking that there is a problem and something ought to be done about it. Now, call me old-fashioned, but I have dreams. And because I am an academic here at Aston, and I literally see dozens of my students graduate every year, I feel personally invested in this issue. And so my dream, and here's a nod to Aston 2020, in line with the Aston 2020 strategy, women will occupy as many business and professional leadership roles as men. That would be my dream. And if we think about why it's not happening, you know, we've had equal opportunities for 40 years. What's the problem? There are loads of reasons there in the public domain, being debated in every newspaper every day. We see articles on this topic every day. And I'm displaying here just a few of those common reasons that get debated. Some of them I would conceptualize as so-called women's issues, work-life balance, long working hours perhaps, lack of female role models, family and childcare. But we've got to bear in mind that 45% of the population, of the workforce, are already female, and they're already dealing with these matters. So for me, those so-called female issues are not actually that convincing. The reason that seems to get top priority in the press all the time is this one about lack of board quotas. And all that means is that companies in the UK, unlike other countries in Europe, are not legally required to regulate the number of women who should be in top jobs. They don't have to set targets and they don't have to stick to them. And that's very unlike many European countries. So this seems to be the thing that's getting all the airtime. If you go to any conferences about the subject, this is the reason that's always debated and seen as the solution to all our problems. So are quotas a solution? Will that bring more women into senior positions? Well, I have to say that I have some sympathy for the quota arguments. I'm an unreconstructed feminist, I'll admit. And I actually quite like the idea of quotas. But actually, my view is they're not going to work. And the reason I think that is that I think that we Brits are very bolshy about regulation. I think that generally we don't like it being imposed with things, and a lot of the opposition actually comes from women as well as men. So it seems to me that quotas, they may come in one day, but it's going to take a long, long time. And so therefore, as an applied linguist, I've wondered about what the other solutions are to this issue. And I have derived my inspiration, if you like, from a very simple phenomenon. Look at a coin. The pound coin has provided my inspiration. Because I believe we're actually locked into looking at the problem in the wrong way. And what we actually need is a radical new perspective on this topic to take us away from this whole quota thing. If you've ever looked at a coin, you can't actually see two sides of a coin at the same time. Now, maybe if I had a new brain, then I would be able to do that. But if you can only see one side of the coin, at the moment, all we're doing is looking at the quantitative side and thinking that figures and changing proportions is going to be the solution. What I believe is that we need to actually flip that coin over and look at the qualitative side of the coin. And by that I mean the people's attitudes, and the language that people use to express their views. So, what do I believe as an applied linguist is the heart of the problem? What I think it is that we still have very entrenched views about what leadership is. In other words, we live in a culture, or cultures, that actually construct leadership identity as masculine. And if you look at some of the images here, we get the idea of what leadership means in our culture and around the Western world particularly. And we see it as meaning that it's heroic, that it's charismatic, that it's about being competitive, about being masterful perhaps. If you're Mark Zuckerberg, I guess it's about being boyish and rule-breaking. And if you're Richard Branson, then you're just plain maverick. So these are the sorts of ideas around leadership. And it's possible that we actually need to challenge some of those, because the problem is, in my view, that women are still constructed as the exception to the norm of male leadership. There are no places, conceptually and linguistically speaking, for women leaders to be. We don't have enough kind of concepts of what women leaders should be. And so what's happened is, consequentially, is that women get pigeonholed, they get labeled, and they get caricatured. And famously, an American scholar called Rosabeth Moss Kanter suggested that there were 4 main stereotypes that women leaders tend to get characterized as. And you can see those 4 there. Even though she was writing back in the 90s, I've recently done a little study of the media, and what I've found actually is that these stereotypes are still alive and kicking out there. And this is the ways in which we actually conceptualize women leaders today. So I'm just going to take you through some of those stereotypes that I have found in popular culture and in the media. And all of them are to do with power, to do with women's relationship with power. So we take the first one, the pet. This is the most powerless of the 4 in a way. And this is where the pet applies to the kind of woman leader who's seen as sucking up to the boss, usually a male boss, and is often described with words, and words are very powerful tools. As girly. On a good day, they might be described as cute, nice, and sweet, but they're not seen as serious. They're seen as ineffectual. And 2 recent figures, Claudia Winkleman, who's a TV presenter, is described as the fringe. And she plays on, almost uses this sort of girly stereotype as a resource to characterize herself. And from a political perspective, there's somebody called Louise Mensch who is a Tory MP, or she was an ex-Tory MP. And famously, she was described as David Cameron's pet before she decided to leave. The second stereotype is a mother, schoolmistress type. Now, this particular stereotype does have power in a way, but she's stereotyped as a woman who uses power to treat colleagues as children. And she would be described as bossy, schoolmarmy perhaps, frumpy and mumsy. And I found that people in the media, political figures, Harriet Harman is often described in those terms. And Kirsty Alsop as well, who's a TV presenter, she gets pigeonholed and labelled in that particular way. The third stereotype is the seductress. Again, this woman has power. She's deemed to have power, but it's power that's derived from flirtation, engaging with men more than women, and she's seen as hugely threatening. So this sort of woman gets a lot of derogatory comment. She might be described as vampish, a man-eater. And there's lots of euphemisms out there from the way in which women like this are characterized. So they're described as inappropriate, unprofessional, distracting, even embarrassing. And once again, I've noticed that figures that tend to be characterized in that particular way are people like Carol Vorderman, who's the TV presenter of Countdown, and the Tory MP, Nadine Dorries, was very much represented in those particular terms. Finally, the figure who is most hated, if you like, and is the most figure of fun, again, is the woman leader who's characterized as a battle axe. And this is because the battle axe has real power. They really do have power. But because they have power, unlike the other 3, they are perhaps most demonized in their representations. So, we tend to forget Margaret Thatcher in her day was very, very demonized, very vilified by her colleagues and by the press. And it's only recently that she's been, in a sense, redeemed, 20 or 30 years later. Interestingly, if you take someone like the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, there was a horrendous article in the press, in the Daily Mail just last week, characterizing her exactly as this, a battle axe. She was called Kaiser Merkel, and she was depicted wearing, a sort of German helmet. So these are sort of quite ugly stereotypes in some way. Now, you might say that actually they're just harmless fun and quite amusing in a way. But I would suggest that there is a problem there. And the problem is that they contribute to a sort of collective unconscious bias The term unconscious bias is one that you'll find in the business world. That, in a sense, what they're doing is that they add to opinions we hardly know we have, and that they reinforce prejudice, if you like. And the truth is, actually, that what we're talking about is real, breathing human beings in the workplace who deserve to be represented in a more rounded way. And my research has really been about looking at, so how can we do that? How can we sort of perhaps counter these stereotypes and enable women to represent themselves as they really are? Because until that happens, we can't really move things forward, in my view. So it's a conceptual problem and it's a linguistic problem. So my design solution was to design a model of leadership language that overturns the gender stereotypes. And the principle behind that is indeed very, very simple, that what we need to do is challenge the sort of the narrow things about stereotypes and replace them with ideas of women leaders that are multidimensional, complex, pluralistic, and show that they don't always have to be objects of humour, but they can produce humour too. And my research was not, a eureka moment. It was very much produced from going into workplaces and observing excellent practice and seeing women using language in a range of different ways. So here you've got quite a complex looking model, but the design principle behind it is very, very simple. Where women can use a really diverse range of language to be effective leaders, that is going to challenge the very narrow stereotypes that are produced. So the more diverse the range of ways in which women construct their identities as leaders, less likely it is that they're going to be labelled, pigeonholed, and so forth. So this model shows 5 ways of using language, and the key one there is this one, self-reflexive language. That's the critical one. And I'm running out of time, but what I wanted to show you quickly was a woman using a wide range of language to counteract the stereotype that she is a battle axe, because this particular woman was viewed by her team as such. So I'm going to just finish with her talking.
Sorry guys, but all I see is QPR2, there's spare 1.8 million somewhere and 300 and something grand somewhere else. I don't see anything. I haven't been shown anything else. I've seen nothing else. That's all I've seen. And all I've seen is I go to the WEA, ask for 2.5 million, hope to f*** nobody asks me, well, how are you doing without the money? Do you know? So I make up some story about refacing. That's what I see. Okay, so for me that's reality. So that's why we need to see month on month. And anyway, it's good practice, we need to be doing it, because once we understand the figures month on month at this table, then we know what we're doing with the business. It's a hell of a long time since I brought that regime in, and it's important for all of us anyway. It's decision making, yeah, it is, yeah. Okay, but I understand what you're saying. It isn't that I'm not listening to you or anything like that, but I have to do what I see.
Okay, the context of that was that she was imposing a very unpopular decision on her team. They'd found a spare 1.8 million in the budget, as you do, and she realised that she had to sort of tackle this problem with her team. The key bit, and I'll just finish on that, is her last line, where she says, "It's decision-making, okay? I understand what you're saying. It isn't that I'm not listening or anything else like that, but I have to do what I see." And there she's using this very self-reflexive language, a language of strategy to really negotiate the difficult decision that she's had to make with her team. So on that note, I'll leave it. Thank you very much.